Hello, everyone, and welcome to... Oh, wait. That's right. This isn't Adventures in Collecting. Welcome to another episode of Side Quest. So, I'm joining you today from the Adventures in Collecting studio. My name is Erik, and I am co-host of that aforementioned podcast, Adventures in Collecting, where we talk about toys and toy news and interview toy designers and fun people from the toy world. But today, I'm here to talk to you about something a little different. If anything, you're going to hop in the Wayback Machine with me all the way back to the 90s. And I want you to hear this sound, and I want you to think. You hear that? What does that sound make you think of? So, for me, that sound takes me back to an arcade. So it's a stack of quarters. It's actually exactly $1 in quarters, which would not last you very long in an arcade. But these days, as we still kind of, stick together and suffer through a global pandemic and social distancing and wearing masks and not necessarily eating in cramped spaces and windowless, dark rooms filled with definitely not sanitized arcade cabinets, I'm thinking about those times I spent over the summer, over breaks, sometimes after school at my local arcade when I was a kid. And there are tons of games to pick from when I was thinking about this endeavor of talking about one single game that meant something to me. But I think given the time that we're in now, it's kind of poignant to remember those arcade moments. And I could close my eyes and I can picture the carpet, the crummy carpet, as I mentioned, the arcade cabinets with the sticky buttons and joysticks that were very much so not sanitized in between use. So, if you had somebody that was on an arcade cabinet before you for an extended period of time, you were all up in their business, basically. Whatever they were leaving behind, you were taking with you when you interacted with it, and you went on to the next arcade cabinet. And a lot of times, you were standing shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers. Sometimes friends, that you might bring to the arcade with you, but most of the time, you were standing shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers on a quest to beat the game that you were playing. And you would take your quarters, and you'd be playing around with them in your hands until you got close enough to the cabinet to put down your quarter to say that you were next. And one game that I was very frequently next on, as I'm sure many were, was 1991. Came out in 1991 from Konami. Was the Simpsons arcade game. And much like all of the other kind of multiplayer beat-em-up games, you chose a character. You endlessly fed the machine quarters because the game was punishingly difficult and was meant to eat your quarters while you sat and enjoyed, but you picked one of the core Simpsons characters, Bart, Lisa, Homer, and Marge, and you went on an adventure with 3 other players, because if you were playing it by yourself, it was a fool's effort. There was no way you were going to beat it unless you had an endless stream of quarters. But you stood shoulder to shoulder with 3 other people, with the Simpsons family, as you attempted to rescue Maggie from the clutches of Mr. Burns and his faithful assistant Mr. Smithers. Yeah, but it was just one of those games where, growing up as a child of the 90s, The Simpsons was everywhere. They were on commercials, they were on merchandise, they were on your shirts, you had dolls, you had action figures, you watched them weekly, if not daily, and of course you played video games. And there were games on the home consoles that, were okay, if not, bad. But looking back on them with rose-tinted glasses, it was a way to experience the hit TV show and cultural phenomenon in a way that was not previously available. And then, there was the arcade cabinet, which, compared to the Nintendo or Sega versions that you had at home, the characters looked like they had walked off the TV onto the CRT that was built into the massive cabinet. and you got to play as them, and you got to go on adventures, and you got to see other characters from the show, and creator Matt Groening, he hid in other other Easter eggs. There were characters that were unique to the game. There was a white bunny, and the name escapes me at the moment, but it was a white bunny that he was actually famous for, including in his zines and his comics prior to The Simpsons, was featured in the game. You had all of the ancillary characters that you're used to seeing on the show. You got to visit these other places in Springfield that maybe you didn't necessarily get to see all the time in the show. It was very much so akin to all of the other, the style of all of the other beat-em-ups that were out there. You know, your Avengers, your X-Men game, of course, the Ninja Turtles games, you know, the Turtles in Time, the first Ninja Turtles game. But it was just how fast could you bash the button and dodge the incoming attacks to play the game. And really, looking back on it, like, you know, I'm sure if you were able to play it now, you know, on a home console, some sort of emulation, and you didn't have that the urgency of, I'm running out of quarters, are we going to get to the end? And you could just kind of play endlessly. I'm sure it's a rather boring game, but going back to the 90s and thinking about the quarters that you either scraped together throughout the week, you know, you were fortunate enough to have, you know, a larger supply than maybe some of your friends or some of the other people in the arcade, but you had a ticking clock. You had a fuse, and your fuse was round and made of metal and had a picture of George Washington on it, because you might not get to the end of the game. And that's something that I think a lot of modern gamers maybe don't realize, right? Because you buy a game, you know, you put down your $60, you bring it home, you install it on your modern console, and you play it through to the end, and you can keep dying, and it might take you longer, you know, to beat it than some of your friends, but ultimately you will see the end of the game, punishingly or not. You will get to the end. That didn't always happen in arcades. So you have kind of this weird cultural thing where you were effectively renting a game, right? By going into an arcade and plugging money into it, you were paying for access to the game, but you didn't get to take it home with you. And there was nothing really comparable at the time. So there were home consoles, but the quality of the game that was available to you in an arcade was much different than the quality of what you had at home, both in graphics and sound and kind of experience. It was tactile. It was social. It was social before we had the ability to just fire up our console, put on our headphones, and talk to our friends, frankly, around the world as we play a game. You know, whether it's something like Fortnite or Mario Kart or Call of Duty or, you know, pick your poison. But back then, if you wanted a kind of a more far-reaching, a more wide multiplayer gaming experience, you went down to the arcade. Or if you were on, a lot of people didn't have an arcade in their town or nearby, so a lot of people experienced these arcade games in a much shorter time frame. They went on vacation. Here in New Jersey, they went to the Jersey Shore, they went to the boardwalk, and in the boardwalk there were arcades, which there still are arcades today, but that was how they experienced these games. So you might have been somebody who grew up in a town that didn't have access to an arcade, and you traveled and went on vacation, and all of a sudden, here's this Simpsons arcade cabinet, and your eyes wide, and, you know, you pop in a quarter and then die almost instantly. But it's just one of those things where I think sometimes as gamers, as modern gamers, and, you know, I continue to play modern video games, but as gamers, I think we've lost sight of the fact that we've come so far, right? We take it for granted how easy it is to play video games, not just with other people, but until the end. And I know that might sound to some, maybe some younger gamers that are listening to this, might sound crazy, but yeah, there was a chance that when you played a video game in an arcade, you might not see the end. You might not get to the end ever. And then, you know, games rotated out of arcades or broke depending on how often they were played, how well they were cared for and maintained. So, if you were one of those people that didn't have a local arcade and you were used to like maybe 2-3 times a year getting to an arcade at some sort of travel destination, you might get back there one time and then that cabinet's gone and you missed it. You never got to see the end. And also there was no internet, so you couldn't go on the internet and look up the end of the game. What a crazy thing to think about. But yeah, so I mean, I could have picked so many different games, but for me the Simpsons was it. I was huge into the Simpsons, into Bart and Bartman and all of the kind of pop cultural status of the Simpsons, and I was just the right age for it. So in the 90s, getting to play in a video game as Bart and beat up bad guys with a skateboard was really kind of it for me. That was peak. Yeah. And I tried looking it up prior to pressing record here, and I can't find a version of the game that's currently available anywhere. It looks like it was for a short period of time, but it isn't now, which is, again, I'm sure without the mechanism of having to physically insert quarters and then thusly running out of them, it's probably a much different experience. But I would love to stumble upon an arcade cabinet or Arcade 1-Up, the company that's producing those new smaller form factor in-home arcade cabinets. They've done Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam, and they just did a Turtles one, and there's an X-Men and Marvel one coming out. I would love for them to do a Simpsons one, if only so that I could walk up to it in Walmart and play again for a little bit. But I hope that if we learn one thing coming out of this pandemic and we come out on the other side, I hope we learn to appreciate things like an arcade and being close to each other and really not taking that for granted, because it has been more than a year of pandemic, and frankly, I would love to get back into an arcade and get somebody's joystick hand sweat all over my hands. Yeah, I'd love to do that again. Happy gaming.